Okay, I believe we are live now. Good evening, everyone. My name is Alex. I'm from Forge and Foster, and welcome to our Hamilton 2020 Commercial Real Estate Year-End Review. I'll be taking you through what has happened through 2020, and lots has. Before we begin, I want to say there's a lot of information that I'm going to be putting on you guys. We have a short amount of time, so I'm going to try and get through it as efficiently as possible. So we typically take questions at the end of our presentations, but given the circumstances, I'm not going to do it today just to make sure that we get through everything. As well as I might be going through some industry terms that you may not be familiar with, or just touching on trends that we've delved in from previously. So if you have any questions at any time during the stream, my email should be in the YouTube description below. Feel free to shoot me an email, and I'll do my best to get to you as soon as I can with your questions. So let's get into it. So the two questions we're going to be looking through and exploring mainly are, how has COVID-19 affected Hamilton commercial real estate in 2020? And we're going to be looking at comparisons of 2017, 2018, and 2019. Typically, we do year-over-year comparisons, but given obviously COVID has had a major impact on commercial real estate, we want to see how the trends that have happened in 2020 really compare to the previous years, what you would consider a typical commercial real estate year. From that, what are some predictions and assumptions we can make for 2021 and for a time post COVID? And then two sub questions we're going to look into that are also tied together too is, the big question is, what is going to happen with office, not just for Hamilton, but pretty much the world in general. And then from that, our cities, we're seeing a massive exodus right now, or what's being portrayed as a massive exodus, particularly for us from Toronto. And how is that going to have an impact on us as well moving forward? So before going into any analysis, I should say a lot of these assumptions that we're going to be making are really heavily predicated on the timeline for Canada's COVID-19 vaccine. A lot of similar economists are also really reliant on Canada's projected timeline of, in general, seeing 50% of the population vaccinated halfway through the summer, and then by year end, having 100% of our population vaccinated. And I think Trudeau is quoted as saying about 70% of our population should be around September. There has been stated very recently that there's been quite a hiccup right now, which is the rolling out of vaccinations, but they've also said at the same time that the subsequent vaccinations that we should be receiving in the short term should help facilitate that temporary loss that we're seeing through right now. So hopefully everything goes okay. So what happened in 2020 for commercial real estate for Hamilton? Quite a lot. So we saw $1.2 billion worth of commercial real estate transaction take place in Hamilton last year. This takes into consideration any commercial real estate transaction of over $500,000. And look what happened to the years previously, so you can compare. In 2019, we saw 950 million. 2018, we saw just over $1 billion, 1.1. And in 2017, we saw just under 900 million. So incredible to see that this was, since Forge and Foster has been recording information, the biggest year for value in Hamilton, despite what you may naturally think might be a down year for a lot of things during COVID. And so how does this stack up to previous years again? So we see here on the left, the vertical column measures the number of commercial real estate transactions. You can see how many took place through the various months of the year. So red is going to be 2020, and the subsequent graphs you'll see moving forward are in the brown color as well. So you can see we started off in 2020 with a huge year for January, pretty big year for February. Then the announcements of the lockdown happens in March, and you can see the huge effect that had on the commercial industry, just really suppressed the amount of transactions that took place. What's typically a fantastic year in the summer for commercial real estate was the complete opposite. It was the lowest amount of transactions we've ever seen for Hamilton since 2017. And then a huge boost in July, and it follows pretty typical trends that we've seen for a typical commercial real estate year in Hamilton. Interesting to see. And how many transactions actually did take place in Hamilton? So in 2020, we saw 289 commercial real estate transactions take place. The previous year, 325. And in both for 2017 and 18, we saw 341. So this is also incredible to think about when you really have that $1.2 billion figure in mind too, is that we had the lowest amount of transactions during this time frame that we're looking at, but the highest dollar amount of transactions take place. And we'll touch on that in our predictions at the end. So how does that stack up comparatively to different asset classes? So you can see typical trends are keeping online. Land right now is absolutely a huge boost right now. Land ICI, which stands for Industrial, Commercial, Institutional. So that could technically incorporate land that's for a retail plaza. But what you're really seeing right now is industrial land is the ticket that's really being purchased right now. Land res following similar trends that we've seen before. Industrial, surprising to see, very low. Given what we've heard from so many other outlets in previous quarterly updates, is that industrial and multi-residential is staples right now through the pandemic and for the view forwards. Retail, absolutely huge, which is the opposite. Retail is really bleeding right now. This is heavily impacted by one transaction that just happened near the end of 2020. And in multi-residential, just skyrocketing up again, almost closer to 2017 levels, really showing that affirmation for that asset class in Hamilton. And what we're going to touch on shortly is office. Obviously, doesn't really compare to some of the other larger asset class categories, but a good year for office despite the question marks revolving that asset class. So before I get into office and look into some of the kind of predictions around there, really just want to quickly touch on industrial and multi-residential and really show how much of its value has increased through the last 4 years. So for industrial values, we're seeing dollar per square foot values on the left here. And you can see they've increased almost uniformly per year, a 42% increase over 4 years. So you could buy industrial, this is the average, for less than $100 a square foot in 2017. And currently, from 2020 data, it's just under $140 a square foot. So you can see the huge demand and appreciation of value for industrial. And you can see it's actually increased largely over multi-residential. And you can see the dollar per suite values on the left here, how typically in the years 2017, 2018, and 19, it was hovering between 135,000 to 145,000 a door. And I would say a lot of the transactions that took place in this time frame were some of the smaller existing multi-residential assets that have been existing for decades in Hamilton. They're more of a value add play. And in this year, you're really seeing a huge boost in larger institutions purchasing larger towers that might not necessarily be for a value add play, but more for an income play. And that's why you're seeing the values really skyrocketing taking place in 2020. So back to the question about the office, is it dead? And I really want to kind of investigate 2 office transactions that took place in Hamilton. These are the 2 largest office transactions that took place last year in Hamilton. And it's really kind of starting this new classification of an asset, and it's what's becoming thrown around as flex or flexible space. So the first largest transaction was the Hamilton Spectator Building. This was purchased by McMaster Innovation Park. And the other one was a portfolio sale of these 5 buildings just across the street from that previous asset. And the reason I think that these 2 are the 2 largest and some smart purchases on these parts is because 1, it's within an area of Hamilton that is primed to see huge economic growth. What you can see over here is known as the West Hamilton Innovation District. This is McMaster Innovation Park here. And then they've also further cemented their foothold in this area with the purchase of the former Hamilton Spectator Building. And what you're seeing in the news right now is for the most part, tech companies have been really good weathering the storm right now. A lot of that, in fact, to do weathering through the storm, of being able to work from the home, work from anywhere. Who's heard of Zoom before the pandemic? That's becoming a huge proponent. We're using it right now. And so these are the office types, if you want to call it that, they're really kind of progressing in the current term during the pandemic because 1, tech users are using this in particular for this specific site. And 2, it's just a low barrier of entry. So typically what you might find in Hamilton is maybe you're paying $20 per square foot, $30 per square foot for an office space traditionally, especially in the downtowns. But conversely, when you take a space like this, you can maybe find it for like literally half that price. So especially in a time like this becomes even more attractive. And the spaces could range from anywhere between something where you just need a roof over your head and a concrete floor, and you can just do your tech startup in that sort of situation, all the way up to something that's more professional, that's already existing in these sites with a sleep clinic or a health type tech business, which Hamilton is really gaining a strong foothold in with the latter. And with the spec building, there was a story that broke last year that I think one of their first tenants is revolved around nuclear research. So in particular, this area in office and tech is moving along positively hand in hand. And I just want to touch on that that's not going to show the demise, in my personal opinion, for all offices. These are two relatively new office projects that are taking place in 2020 in Hamilton, located right in the downtown core. And I think location is a big factor when you have to maybe look at specifically Hamilton office values. As it's located along the proposed LRT route, there's a ton of residential developments that are just a few blocks away from these two projects as well. As you can see, La Una's crane for their two towers right beside 59 King Street East. And then you have Effort Trust office being currently constructed. And this is fantastic to see, as Effort Trust, a huge force within the city of Hamilton. And I can't personally recall them doing a recent build in quite some time. So it's interesting to see that an office is one of their more recent developments, and they're also repurposing a building down the street as well into 40 residential condos as well, which is great to see. So I also want to look at where we kind of began before the pandemic. These are CBRE statistics for Toronto. And so I'm looking at Q3 2019. So this is before the pandemic, and the statistics that are more current today for Q4 2020. So some things to consider. Overall vacancy in the GTA was at 6.8%. It was on its way to go down to a record low 6.6%. And Toronto's vacancy rate was at 2.3%, the tightest in all of North America for office vacancy. And you can see that right here, 2.3. And their average dollar per square foot asking net rents were $35.40. Fast forward to today, obviously not the case. Their vacancy has gone up from 4.7% up all the way up to 7.2% up. Subleasing has increased dramatically as people are trying to figure out what to do and are just physically unable to work inside the office. And then surprisingly enough, rents have actually increased 50 cents per square foot. So I think this indicates that one, a lot of users are really unsure right now, and I think minimally unable to go into the office. But the owners of these spaces are still holding firms. As you can see, that rates have remained unchanged for the time being. And I think this tweet went out pretty virally, at least in the real estate sector. The head of Shopify, Toby, mentioned that they're permanently working remotely. Office centricity is over right now. And a lot of other tech firms that are doing well right now, Shopify is doing extremely well right now, have also kind of fallen in line as well at Twitter and Square as well. But at the same time, these companies that are doing well during this current moment are also the same companies that are leasing up huge swaths of office space throughout North America. As you can see headlines here, Facebook is leasing 730,000 square feet in Manhattan. Amazon inked deal for more office space, just as their competitor Shopify did in Toronto. Amazon acquired 5 more floors of office space. Shopify increased their lease from 340,000 to 90,000 to an increase of 90,000 square feet in Toronto. And you can see here, this funky looking building is Amazon's proposed headquarters in Virginia. It's a total of 2.8 million square feet. So they're just adding even more office space into the North American market. So I think this, for me, indicates that one, the companies that are doing well, obviously COVID has had a major impact on these companies, like every company, but a positive impact on them. And I think that once businesses kind of get their feet settled for the most part and start seeing positive growth, I think they're going to recognize that office space is going to be necessary. And to the extent of how necessary it's going to be is going to be the big question. But I think the fact that it will be necessary to utilize still provides value towards the office asset class. And lastly, before I touch into cities and see, because office and cities are obviously related, this is a CBRE report looking at tech talent. This was in the mid of 2020. And they used a variety of metrics to really provide a grade associated with cities throughout North America. Toronto was number 4 in all of North America through their rankings. But what I want to show here is that Toronto was ranked number 12 in rent. And you can see it comparatively to the other, some bigger cities like Philly and Chicago. So it stacks up with gateway cities. But when you also include total cost, which includes wages, all Canadian cities, not just Toronto, are at the bottom of the pile there, almost at 50. It's at 48 right now, 50 at 50, which provides further credence that especially huge businesses that are American or even global will be looking towards Toronto to set up shop. And that is directly related to those previous statistics we looked at their record low vacancies in all of North America that took place before the pandemic. So if you had to pick one spot in all North America where office would rebound, it would be Toronto. And so very similarly, you've seen the conversation, or you may have seen, of a lot of people that are leaving the big cities. For our specific kind of bubble, that's Toronto. It's our gateway city. It keeps the engine humming for a lot of things, including Hamilton. And you can see that direct relationship with our residential homes right now. So why are people leaving Toronto and other gateway cities? Well, for a big one for Canada is immigration has paused. Canada is very reliant on increasing its population and subsequently its economy through huge numbers of immigration. And also Canada is also the third highest in the world of accepting international students. So there's a factor in that. Plus, students are not occupying these spaces in the big cities as well right now. In conjunction, if you are living in a big city, that city lifestyle is absolutely not on pause, or is on pause right now, can't utilize it. So, and for instance, if you're in Toronto right now, renting a space that's 500 square feet where you could get half the rent for double the space in maybe Hamilton, people are starting to look elsewhere. And that's why you're seeing, in part, why you're seeing this huge exodus coming out of Toronto, in conjunction with very low interest rates right now and high savings. If people can, they're looking to afford to purchase homes rather than living in a condo or renting in gateway cities right now. And this is a statistics pulled from CIBC, which took from StatsCan. And Canadian households right now have $170 billion in unspent savings, according to StatsCan right now. And obviously that's being looked at into pursuing homeownership rather than some recreational activities you might do, like a restaurant or a theater right now. And I should also mention that this trend of leaving the city isn't new. Like many other trends, because of COVID, it's just being accelerated right now. As you can see, this is from StatsCan as well, but Bloomberg put this graph together. Since 2014, almost like 10 years, people have been leaving Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver at a faster rate. And you look at the demographic here, it's really the younger ages that are really growing the most. It's the orange, which is 0 to 14, and the grays, which are 15 to 29, and the blues, which are 30 to 40, which really signifies to me that it's young families that are moving. It's millennials for the most part that are a huge factor in this. And it's just, I think, a natural trend to find bigger space, to start a family. It's really hard to do that in a downtown condo, or maybe in a home that's very expensive comparatively in Toronto to Hamilton, and they're looking for spaces in the 905. Toronto is also the fastest growing city in North America. This is a statistic took from 2019 from the US Census Bureau and StatsCan. This is from a Ryerson report that they've compiled. Toronto, by far the fastest growing city in North America, with Montreal right behind, and a lot of Canadian cities are. And again, that's a huge part to immigration. As you can see, Hamilton is 20th fastest growing city in North America. And you can see subsequent Ontario cities like London and Kitchener are following suit, and that's a huge part of Toronto as well. And that's a huge part, again, because of immigration. This is a graph showing Toronto and New York, Toronto in blue. Natural increase, fairly small for Toronto. International migration, huge boom into Toronto. And you can see it's actually a net negative. More people in Canada are leaving Toronto than going into it. And Toronto is really supplementing their population through immigration. So when that's not there, like right now, you're seeing the effects of that. So Canada was on our record to accept immigration. I think they're going to accept about 350,000 people last year. That didn't happen obviously because of lockdown. So they're looking to make up for the fact from that loss. They're accepting 400,000 people in the upcoming years, and it's going to be a record. We won't be seeing these numbers since 1900s if it all goes according to plan. Again, same factors that we've seen. Why are people leaving? 30 regions in Canada hit record sales in January through November. It's just cheaper, and now you're able to work from home, and especially since you can't do the big city stuff and you can't work in the office right now. This is taken from statistics from Q4. This is Cbre, just showing some huge numbers here. The number of listed for rent soared 132% in Q4. Condo values have diminished. Condo rental values have diminished by 17% almost for 1 beds. 2 beds have diminished almost 15%. And just the actual value of a condo in Toronto, selling prices have decreased on average about 2.5%. For Hamilton, it's the opposite, actually, especially for our housing. Our housing average from RAB is almost increased 17%, which is insane. And in Hamilton, a single attached house sat on the market for an average of 24 days comparatively for 31 in 2019, so almost a third less. And these are RAB stats from year end, looking at 2019 and 20. You can see a breakdown of further Hamilton districts. And there's some huge gains, double-digit gains for almost every sector in Hamilton for values. The big one is Dundas. Look at Dundas. Their housing values increased almost 25% last year. Flamborough is second place with 19%, which provides, to me, further credence that people are looking for that suburban lifestyle. They're coming out of Toronto for that family lifestyle, maybe. And then secondly, also like something to consider is the next highest gains are Hamilton Centre and Hamilton East. Traditionally, the two lowest values in Hamilton are seeing huge demand there, and I think that's because of affordability right now. And I think rounding out the city conversation is we're going to look at CMHC's rental market report that just came out in January of 2021. They look at Hamilton. The overall vacancy rate for rentals in Hamilton is at 3.5%. They say it's unchanged. Last year was at 3.9%. So they're considering that 0.4% difference to really be negligible. But it's interesting the vacancy rate has technically dropped, and also the average rent has increased to $1,200, up 5.5%, which is double the provincial average. So you're seeing vacancies go down, rents go up, which indicates that there's demand for multi-residential in Hamilton, which is what we're seeing is the opposite effect in the gateway cities. And CMHC is also recognizing that fewer renters are transitioning to home ownership. So what you're seeing is the current rental class in Hamilton is really kind of staying put right now. You're seeing existing homeowners within the area potentially upgrading. And obviously, you're seeing a lot of citizens from outside Hamilton really taking up homes in Hamilton as well. And CMHC has also recognized that lower international migration and fewer students are making up the rent population, which is even more surprising to see that rents are doing fine in Hamilton. And maybe the most eye-popping stat from this report is condominium rental supply, which is a secondary rental supply. The vacancy rate for condo rentals is 0.3%, absolutely minimal. And what CMHC has recognized is that people are just looking for the newest building amenities right now. So I think it provides further affirmation that people who are looking to rent in Hamilton are looking for some of their higher qualities. I think that has something to do in line with the high values that we saw this year in 2020 that we previously saw for multi-residential statistics. So we got about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to go quickly through these, but these are the highest transactions that took place in Hamilton. The first we touched on already, the former Hamilton Spectator building. Second, multi-residential, $26 million for a value of $175,000 a suite. There's some excess land. This is in the east end of Hamilton, so higher than the previous averages we saw for 2017 and 2019 from a firm from BC, which further signifies that bigger players are looking at Hamilton right now as an investment. Two land plays are next, $36 million for land by the airport by Broccolini, a company from Montreal. $55 million acquisition beside Brimbrook. This is probably going to be speculative land for another residential development that's in the burgeoning growth of the town of Brimbrook. And then further closer to Grimsby, you have Crest Point Real Estate's acquisition of some commercial land. Obviously, retail, big question mark right now. Interesting to see that they're investing in this power center. However, this is a huge growth area within the city of Hamilton. And Costco is right there, so it is grocery anchored, which is fantastic, even though it's not technically part of their land. And there's tons of high density development that are happening in this area right now that can help facilitate maybe that retail plaza. Next one is the portfolio sale. So technically not one of these is over $100 million, but together they're $137 million purchased by Interrent REIT, another big institution, 528 suites, 260,000 a door. This is probably a little bit less because this does not take into account 40,000 square feet of commercial space, but big acquisition in fantastic areas. These two right by the West Harbor. This one right downtown, really close to that Gore Park node that we touched on with those two previous offices. And then lastly, these are the two biggest transactions that took place. 140 Main Street West, purchased by Quadrille for $443 a door. Absolutely huge. The last time this building sold was in 2017 for $80 million, almost half the value. So I think that provides like a great flavor of just really showing the value increase for Hamilton as a whole, not just the multi-residential sector. And the biggest deal that took place was 1089 Barton Street East, $150 million, 678,000 square feet. As you can see, it's absolutely massive. It's this whole thing right here, about 8 to 10 city blocks here, purchased for $221 a square foot by the same retailers that we saw before, Crestpoint Real Estate, having a huge impact on Hamilton. And interesting enough, I'm just going to touch on this quickly, but just retail as a segment, everyone knows that retail is doing very poorly right now, especially with the prevalence of e-commerce, and COVID's really shuttering them in. There's not a lot of buyers right now going to the stores. But specifically with that segment with 1089 Barton Street East, it's 87% leased, so pretty decent. And it sold for $34 million more in 2014. So really showing how much of an impact retail has had in the depreciation of value for that specific asset. And I think with any retail right now, you're seeing a lot of people pivot to reduce their exposure, a lot of the big institutions, to either include industrial, which is a bit harder right now, but the easier thing to do is residential. Here's an example of one such project that's happening in downtown Toronto, where this is the Scotiabank Theatre. It's got a bunch of retail in there, and they're looking to retrofit that with 2 huge residential towers. This is an extreme example. A lot of plazas are doing a little bit lower density than this, but this is a direction that a lot of retail owners are going towards right now to really help mitigate their losses. And this is a trend that's, like many things, again, that's happening before COVID, but is being expedited because of COVID. And I'm just going to touch on these really quickly too. Some larger developments that were proposed in Hamilton, 80 John Street North by Ken F Group, 2 30-story towers, Emblem Developments, 14-story tower, both in downtown Hamilton. These 2 are also in downtown Hamilton, a huge acquisition in 2019 by N8, and they proposed these 4-story or 4 towers in the heart of downtown. And then Bentel Greeno, huge players, proposing 3 condos in the heart of downtown Hamilton as well. And I think this just signifies one thing: not only these are massive projects, but just signifying, look at the people who are entering the market right now. They're all outside of Hamilton. Some big news to touch on. Again, within that West Hamilton Innovation District and inside McMaster Innovation Park, big announcement that a CCRM facility is going to be going in there, developing and creating future vaccines and other health-related therapies. They aim to be a global leader. It's going to be one of the largest in the world, this type of facility. Film industry is absolutely booming, even during pandemic. And the announcement of Aon Bayfront Studios coming to the West Harbor area in Hamilton was a huge boost, and this is projected to be once up and running, the biggest film studio, literally in size in Hamilton, as I'm sure is going to attract some huge demand there. Amazon, with a huge announcement, they're going to be operating almost a 1 million square foot facility near the airport. The airport at one time was the fastest growing airport in North America. I believe that was 2018, 2019. So they're showing the huge development there, and coincides with that broccolini purchase that we touched on. And then HUPEG, Hamilton Urban Precinct Group, which is a group of a ton of bunch of groups, but the main ones I could fit here are Carmen's Group, LaUna, Bengate Capital, Meridian Credit Union, and they pitched the city, which they're subsequently they're just about to agree on, apparently, a $500 million pitch to renovate and operate the First Ontario Centre, which is the arena downtown. This is rendering of it. First Ontario Concert Hall, Convention Center, and also some new residential developments in that mix. They have been in talks, but COVID has paused that a little bit. So during that time, so this was announced last year, and then this year there was a recent story saying that that the conversations have moved along and that they're hopefully near the end of that agreement. So closing thoughts, we're just coming to the end now, so I'm just going to try and get through these as succinctly as possible. But Hamilton has never seen a $100 million purchase since Fortune Foster's been recording in 2017. So what does this mean? So that fact, coupled with the low commercial real estate transaction volumes that we've seen, indicate to me a few things. One, values are increasing naturally in Hamilton. Hamilton is attracting bigger players that are recognizing this trend, which is simultaneously making it more difficult to acquire because of increased competition. So obviously the low impact in transactions was also impacted by COVID as well. So I think in next year, we're not going to see the low of 285 or that number, whatever it was, of transactions, but maybe somewhere in between 320 and 285. So as it's becoming more difficult to acquire, you're going to see lower numbers, but not as low as we saw in COVID. And we're not just seeing large asset management firms come in and purchase existing buildings. You're seeing new developers entering the market as supply just gets quickly eaten up in Hamilton. And something I didn't mention is the Hamilton, based on provincial guidelines, is expected to grow by 236,000 people and 122,000 jobs by 2051. And I think a lot of these aforementioned firms recognize that fact and are looking here to accommodate that. Moving on, almost all areas in Ontario, it's my belief, surrounding Toronto will do well for the reasons that we stated. Toronto will continue to be fueled by record immigration levels with rising detached home costs. As those costs increase, condos are going to look more and more affordable and more of a real option, especially as the cities open up. And that's going to be fueled again with immigration, students, and so on and so forth. The 905 and suburbs are going to continue to be fueled by existing population, and recreational real estate, which we didn't talk about, cottages, are going to continue to gain traction as they're going to be a work from home node. But to a lesser extent, as there's going to be a global opening, there's just going to be the cork's going to come off with people wanting to travel. And in conjunction, Airbnbs are going to bounce back, and that's going to further eat up the rental supply in gateway cities in any city, really. And lastly, office, what's going to happen with office? We kind of touched on it or through the office segment already, but in the second half of 2021, you're going to see a flood of people being able to do what they want, whether it's going to restaurants, gyms, theaters, and it's just going to provide vitality through the city and subsequently offices. On the flip side, we've learned a lot of things through COVID and we have adapted behaviors that are going to stick, but to a lesser extent. We're not going to do as many Zoom meetings as we once did. Working from home is going to continue. And it's really that metric, is it going to be all office or all working from home? And it's really going to be somewhere in between that's really showing what's happening. Online shopping, exercising at home, these are things that are going to happen as well. And office will rebound because it's nice to be around people and socialize, better environment for collaboration and knowledge sharing, general employment politics for personal growth. There might be a downsizing in the short term, but Toronto positioned well to have space absorbed, as from the reasons that I mentioned before, and changes for Class A office towers will be in demand, touchless interfaces and so on and so forth. So it's our belief that the official office is going to be there, but with greater flexibility to remote from home. Again, if you had any questions, please view my email in the description below. I'm happy to answer anything right now. And thank you for joining us, and take care.